Ever been told you remembered it wrong? This story is for anyone who's been gaslit, edited, or erased. If you've ever doubted your truth, watch closely. I always knew something was off about the way we remembered things. Not in the cute, absent-minded way people joked about, forgetting where they parked or misplacing their badge in the break room. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was something colder, sharper, like someone had taken a scalpel to the edges of your mind and stitched in something that didn't belong. A phantom meeting, a name you knew too well, a scent that made you cry for reasons your body remembered, but your story didn't. The others laughed about it. Cloud brain, they called it. As if the word itself would defang the truth. A glitch, a workplace quirk, part of the culture. But I'd worked in memory architecture. Before they softened the language and rebranded it all as neural efficiency, before they slapped a clean UI on what used to be called surveillance. I knew how easily memory could be edited, how trust could be weaponized if it walked hand in hand with convenience. And I knew who held the root access. Lucian Parr, our CEO, our shepherd, our smiling gatekeeper with his glass temples and honeyed voice. He called it ambient memory pooling, like it was a meditation app, not a corporate experiment. No need to remember your to-do list, he'd purr during his updates. We'll remember for you. He made it sound like mercy, a gift. One brain, one mission, a collective hive of perfect recall. But I'd seen the lag, the burn. I'd seen Tim, from comms, blank out in the middle of a sentence, staring like someone else's thoughts had suddenly bloomed behind his eyes. I'd watched Rosa grip the countertop in the break room, her lips moving silently to a song no one else heard. And Jenna, my only real friend in the building, Jenna had looked me in the eyes last Thursday and whispered, "I lost a baby." She clutched her stomach like it still hurt. And I believed her. Except Jenna's never been pregnant. She blinked fast, like waking from a dream she couldn't explain. "I don't know where it came from," she whispered, "but it felt like mine. I remembered pain, and I remembered a name. I'd picked a name." Her voice cracked. Her name was Ada. I froze. She'd given the memory a name. That's when I knew this wasn't drift. This was insertion. I went straight to the neural support desk. They brushed me off with the usual script, residual ghosting. "A mild side effect of memory harmonization," the tech said, like he was reading off a cereal box. "The system sometimes pulls ambient emotions during peak stress states. She's probably just echoing background data. Nothing dangerous. Except she's mourning a child that never existed," I said. He smiled like I'd complimented his shoes. "Well, perception is 9/10 of memory, right?" I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Because screaming doesn't work here. Not after the last time. 2 years ago, I reported something. Not memory-related. Just a pattern. A red flag in how interns were being assigned tasks far beyond their clearances, followed by sudden leaves of absence. My concern went to compliance, to our ethics supervisor. His name was Garen Trask. He told me, "We'll protect you. Just tell us everything." I did. And then the HR reformatting notice arrived in my inbox before the day ended. Wellness protocol, mandatory cognitive resync, cleared for continued productivity. My workstation got reassigned. My name was quietly unlinked from old projects. They called it optimization. I called it erasure. That was my first scar. So no, I didn't scream when Jenna said she remembered a child that had never lived. I didn't demand a board meeting. I didn't write another memo. I just watched. And I started saving things, quietly. Fragments, glitches, metadata, redundancies. I began feeding a private archive, hidden under a dead access code linked to a terminated consultant ID. I called it Eve, short for eventual extraction. It became my ritual. Every night after sync cycles, I'd pull packets and bury them in Eve's analog chamber. No live wipes, no digital fingerprints. It was my rebellion, my prayer. Because the more I looked, the clearer it became. The system wasn't broken. It was working perfectly. Lucien didn't need bodyguards. He didn't need NDAs or security walls. He had something better: suggestibility. One faint tweak to a morning protocol, and the bruises vanished. You forgot who made you cry. You remembered the apology, but forgot the slap. They called it neural efficiency. I called it theft. I started noticing how often I apologized in meetings without knowing why. How often people use the same phrasing for different projects, like parrots trained in compliance code. Aligned synergy, mission tier cascade, progressive integrity metrics. The language wasn't just empty, it was planted, echoed, reinforced. And yet, everyone smiled. Everyone showed up on time, because forgetting was easier, because pain was easier when it came with structure and clean fonts. But I couldn't forget. Not after Jenna. That night, I sat at her desk long after she'd gone home. The chair still warm, her screen still flickering with sync alerts, a coffee cup with a lipstick ring and no name. I touched the neural port under her desk. I closed my eyes. And I remembered Ada. A name that never existed. A life mourned by a ghost. A grief so real, it hollowed her out. They call it optimization, I whispered to no one. But what do you call it when you remember pain that isn't yours? That was the night I knew. The only way out wasn't protest. It was a replication. Let them feel it. Let them all feel it. The bruises, the betrayals, the sins they paved over with productivity metrics and ambient playlists. I didn't want justice. I wanted remembrance. And I knew exactly where to begin. They taught us not to trust our instincts, just our updates. Every morning, the sync node would pulse at 8 o'clock a.m. sharp, subtle as a yawn. A little hum under the skin, a faint flicker at the corner of your eye, and then the memory stream would settle. What to prioritize, who to smile at, which version of yourself to wear. Some people liked the sensation. They said it felt like being gently reset. I found that phrase chilling. I started keeping track of those mornings, not in my official log, never on company hardware. I'd trace each sync window by how far off I felt, what details slipped, what emotions flickered in like static before dissolving. It wasn't a conscious plan at first, just a compulsion, a quiet refusal to be rewritten. After Jenna's miscarriage, that wasn't. I began to record anomalies with surgical precision. I'd done this kind of forensic pattern tracing in the early years, back when I still believed in reform, in policy audits, in human-centered design, before I realized how the system was built not to protect us, but to smooth over what it didn't like, to compress the curve of descent until it looked like user error. Now I was hunting ghosts in the machine. Jenna didn't know what I was doing. No one did. I made sure of that. I played compliant, smiled at compliance, laughed at Lucian's updates, nodded when he said streamlining, even when I knew he meant erasure. I mirrored their language like a mask, one hand scribbling on corporate whiteboards while the other downloaded back-end cache reports under dummy credentials. They thought I'd been reformed, but I'd just gone quiet. I called it Eve, the offline analog vault no one could sync with. She lived in an obsolete access panel under my desk, embedded inside an old diagnostics tower flagged as retired. It still powered on, barely, but it was just enough to store raw logs, stripped of metadata. She didn't at sync. She remembered. The only one left who could. Every night after shift, I fed her. Spectrograms, system pulse logs, duplicate memory alerts, things no one else noticed, things no one wanted to notice. Eve became my sanctuary, my proof, my confessional, and all the while, I played my part. That's how it works here. You don't rebel by raising your voice. You do it by smiling harder than they expect. You nod until their guard drops. You learn their rhythm so well that when you break it, they won't even see it coming. I didn't rage. I calculated. Because this wasn't just about Jenna anymore. It was about what they did to me 2 years ago, how they made me question my own sense of violation, how they turned truth into a misalignment report and filed me under resolved. Back then, I was too naive to see the pattern. Now, I mapped it down to the hour. It was always Friday when they rewrote us. I'd been tracking a spike in cognitive lag every Thursday evening, slow response times, missed cues and team syncs. By Friday morning, everyone was compliant again, glassy-eyed, pleasant, sharpened to the company's liking. I knew what that meant. That morning, Jenna seemed off. She hadn't said more than 2 words to me since our talk about Ada, the imaginary daughter the system gave her. Her eyes darted in tiny flicks, like watching scenes the rest of us couldn't see. We were in the elevator heading up to floor 12 when she grabbed my arm, hard. Her nails bit into my skin. She didn't blink. Her lips parted but didn't move. And then she said it. I remember dying. The words were a whisper, but not weak. They carried weight, like they'd been carved into her bones. My blood turned cold. Before I could speak, she collapsed. Her body hit the steel floor with a hollow thud. Eyes wide, twitching. A seizure without motion. A scream without sound. The elevator froze between floors. And then, like it had been waiting for the cue, security arrived. Too fast. Too clean. They didn't ask questions. They didn't call for a medic. They just took her. She was listed on the board as temporarily reassigned the next day. Her name disappeared from team logs within the hour. When I checked her workspace, it was like she'd never existed. No mug, no notebooks. Even her neural port had been re-sterilized. The access logs wiped. Jenna was gone. And still, no one said anything. Not the team lead. Not HR. Not the girl across the hall who used to braid Jenna's hair during lunch breaks. She vanished into the sink mist like an inconvenient footnote. But I remembered. That night, I sat at my desk while the building emptied. I stared at my terminal, fingers hovering over the keys, not typing. I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I opened Eve and uploaded every last trace of Jenna I could find, her biometric logins, the voice analysis from her I Remember Dying clip, a screenshot of her reassignment notice with the timestamp blinking, 3:14 p.m., same time as last year's incident. Same time they flagged me, a sync pattern, hidden in plain sight. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, they rewrote her soul, and called it syncing. The words tasted like metal, like blood behind my teeth. And then I smiled, because that was the moment I stopped blinking. Lucien held weekly burra, Yifeng's in the atrium, giant screens humming overhead like gods. He liked to talk about clarity, about shared cognition, about how the age of fragmented thought is over. I nodded through it, my smile perfect. But inside I was boiling down every bite of his system to one function: exposure. I wouldn't leak the data. I'd reverse it. Make every employee not see his secrets, but feel them. Not read the reports, remember the pain, as if it were their own. That was the weapon. Not data, empathy. I stood as the crowd applauded Lucian's closing line that day. He bowed slightly, hands clasped like a priest, and I whispered into the applause, I'll show them what you buried, Lucien. I'll make them all remember what you erased. Jenna used to laugh like someone who'd already escaped. Loud, shameless, unfiltered, a sound that didn't belong in a place as sterilized as this. It echoed through the glass corridors like rebellion. There were days I clung to that laugh like a rope, like it could pull me back to the surface. Back before we were file names, before they rewrote what we mourned. Once, she whispered to me during a silent sync downtime, when the lights dimmed and the system pulsed low like a sleeping animal. We were sitting in the elevator, pretending we'd hit the wrong floor so we could talk in private. Her voice was low and tight with too many secrets. If we ever make it out, she said, pulling a piece of gum from her jacket, I'm burning this place down, just so the air finally smells like truth. I remember laughing. I remember the flicker of something dangerous rising in my chest. I didn't say it aloud, but I thought it. You won't have to. I'll do it for you. Back then, I still had something to lose. My record, my access, my career trajectory. But now I had Eve, and rage wrapped in precision, and silence sharper than any protest ever was. The day after Jenna vanished, I returned to her workstation. Not during hours. After. When the cleaners were drones and the security cams looped blank halls. Her desk was scrubbed, her seat re-leveled. But they'd forgotten the smallest thing, the neural port embedded under the glass console. Most had been disabled when direct thought-to-data transfers were phased out last quarter. But Jenna had always resisted the updates, said they made her dizzy, said she preferred the old interface, where at least I knew what I was giving away. Her stubbornness was a gift. I traced the rim of the port with my fingertip, cold, dusty, but not broken. That night, I ran a hidden script I called Grief Sync. It was something I'd written after they erased my complaint 2 years ago, meant for personal backup, a ghost protocol. It mimicked the biometric fluctuations of a morning employee and requested silent system access under wellness parameters. The system flagged it as compassionate accommodation, which meant no alerts, no witnesses. I plugged in. The moment the port warmed beneath my palm, a memory bloomed. Not mine. Lucien's. Faint. Fragmented. But there. It was a boardroom. A girl in a gray blouse, maybe 22, standing too straight, jaw clenched. She was trembling. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to, because I felt it. The dismissal, the smile, the calculation behind Lucian's narrowed eyes as he leaned back and said something like, "Not everyone's ready for this level of integration." I tore myself out of the sink, My breath came in shallow bursts. I staggered backward, hands still tingling. My skin felt singed. It had worked. By using Jenna's port, by accessing through the old analog entry, I'd caught a reverse bleed. A flash of memory not from the cloud, but from the server. From him. Lucian. They told us the CEO didn't store anything locally, that his syncs were isolated, encrypted, locked behind 10 layers of system keys. They lied. His mind was the keystone, the anchor to all of it, which meant that if I could reverse the flow, amplify his private threads and reroute them through the sync update, I could turn every employee into a mirror. 1,000 minds carrying his shame. Not a leak, not a headline, a transmission. I sat on the floor next to Jenna's desk. My pulse slowed, my vision steadied. I remember the quiet, the kind that feels like a held breath right before the storm arrives. I opened my palm and stared at the slight burn across the skin. A spider web of red lines where the port had seared me. It didn't hurt. Not enough. I walked back to my cubicle, past the glowing panels, the hum of air-sanitized corridors, the fake greenery pumped with scent triggers meant to soothe. I sat down and pulled open the drawer. My ID badge gleamed under the harsh desk light. Gold stripe, level 4 clearance, the last piece of who I used to be. I took it off, held it between my fingers, felt its weight, the weight of everything I'd protected, everything I'd pretended to be. Then I dropped it in the drawer and closed it. Not locked, just done. I wasn't walking out, I murmured, my voice flat, even. I was walking deeper in, this time with fire. I pulled up Eve's interface and began writing the loop. Line by line, not code, a confession, his. They always scheduled system updates for Friday afternoons, just before the weekend memory archive sync. It was the sweet spot. People were tired, compliant, half checked out. Whatever discomfort flickered across their neural relay during the injection would be filed under weekend fatigue by Monday morning. Lucian called it the trust window. It was 3:06 p.m. when I logged in using my shadow admin shell, the one masked under a recycled ID from a terminated contractor who'd mysteriously resigned last fall. Her name was Ava, and I remembered her well, not because she spoke often, but because she stopped showing up one day without a trace. Her login had been dormant ever since. Today, Ava rose from the dead. I executed the voice mimic protocol first, mapping Lucian's unique cadence through hours of archival footage and casual updates. I didn't just steal his voice, I sculpted it. Spliced syllables, altered inflections, layered micropauses so the rhythm hummed with familiarity. It had to be him. Not just a synthetic sound, but a presence, a trusted guide. The system trusted him more than its engineers. The loop itself was compact, just under 3 minutes of memory echoes formatted in emotional architecture. These weren't simple video files or audio logs. They were feeling files, neuro-tagged spectrums of guilt, pride, dominance, lust, shame. Each byte woven from Lucian's mind, not as facts, but impulses. You wouldn't hear what he did. You'd feel why he did it. I embedded the loop inside the Friday update package V812.3 under the productivity patch for streamlining task delegation. That was the irony. Productivity. They'd feel his memories during a team meeting about engagement metrics. At 3:11 p.m., I walked calmly toward the basement corridor. No one saw me. No one ever looked down there unless the servers blinked. My boots echoed softly against the polished concrete. Overhead, old filament bulbs flickered like dying stars. Useless, forgotten. The hallway smelled like heat and dust and burnt ozone. I reached the auxiliary terminal where Eve lived, tucked behind a forgotten fire door with a malfunctioning lock. I slid it open with a whisper of metal and bent to connect her drive. Eve's lights blinked to life, slow and red, like a heartbeat, like readiness. I glanced at my wrist. 3:13 p.m. The building was humming above me with the sync rituals, people sipping their pre-weekend protein drinks, scanning their dashboards, reading their personalized empathy tips from the emotional wellness feed. And then, 3:14 p.m., launch. I closed my eyes and imagined the moment unfolding floor by floor, like a drop of ink bleeding through paper. It would start with the screens. Lucian's face would appear as always, poised, clean-shaven, glasses reflecting the data bloom behind him. His voice would slide into their ears like silk, like muscle memory. Only this time, he wouldn't talk about KPIs. He'd say, "You liked the way she flinched, didn't you?" I saw it play in my mind like a stage I'd already lit. In the main atrium, 1,000 employees froze, mid-scroll, mid-laugh, mid-sip. What's one ruined intern if the quarterly targets met? Elevators halted between floors. You signed off on her edit, even though you knew it wasn't hers. A paper cup dropped from someone's hand and bounced once. Silence followed. You used her suicide in the marketing deck. The system didn't filter emotion anymore. It transmitted it. Every node became a carrier. Every eye that watched, every ear that heard, was encoded with Lucian's original chemical signatures of smugness, of strategic cruelty, of detached justification. You didn't just witness his choices. You felt them. You were inside them. I sat beside Eve and leaned back against the wall, her warm hum vibrating through the floor and into my spine. There was no celebration, no glee, only stillness, the kind that creeps into your lungs and stretches you open from the inside. The silence above didn't stay still for long. I heard it. Footsteps scrambling, voices raised, then silence again, but heavier this time, more aware. They're processing, and they couldn't stop, because the loop wasn't viral. It was embedded, built to survive reboot, structured like memory itself, encoded on emotional pathways, not code streams. You could format a server, but you couldn't format a feeling. The first man to break was in the third-floor lounge. I watched through the feed. He collapsed into a chair, whispering, "That wasn't me. That wasn't me." His hands clawed at his temples like something inside his skull was itching to get out. But it was him. It was all of them. Because Lucian's decisions weren't just personal. They were institutional. Signed, sealed, streamed. Everyone had benefited. Everyone had played a role. They'd laughed at the wrong moments, deferred to the wrong men, smiled at silences that should have choked them. Now they remembered it all. The guilt wasn't theoretical anymore. It had a pulse. At 3:22 p.m., the sync server began to overload. At 3:25, internal comms went down. At 3:28, the system shut itself off. Emergency lockout. Too late. The loop had already fired. Eve had done her job. And me? I stayed seated in the dark corridor, tracing the burn on my palm from Jenna's old neural port. My fingers tingled. My mind was clear. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of forgetting, because they couldn't forget now either. Above me, the building held its breath. And somewhere in the server stack behind me, Lucian Parr's memories pulsed on repeat. Not hidden, not encrypted. Alive. It started with a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just off. A ceramic clink that didn't land right. The kind of noise that draws silence around it. A coffee mug slipped from someone's fingers on the second floor. It spun once on the tile before shattering. That's when the first body slumped against the wall, knees giving out like a marionette with its strings clipped. Then another, staggering backward from her desk, mouth parted in soundless breath. You could see it roll through the building like a wave underwater. Glassy eyes shifting focus, shoulders tensing, fingers twitching as if trying to scrape something invisible off their skin. And then, voices. Not commands, not questions. Whispers. One man near the executive suite collapsed to the floor and rocked, gripping his head with white-knuckled fists. His voice was raw when it came. That wasn't me. But it was. Oh, it was. Lucian's memories had embedded exactly the way I designed them to, not as facts, but as sensations, as lived experience. Guilt that crawled beneath fingernails, shame that seared the lungs. The same self-justifying thoughts Lucian whispered to himself in the dark were now echoing in their minds. And for the first time, every employee felt exactly what he felt when he signed off on pain. But they weren't wired to withstand it. Because guilt, real guilt, isn't a weight you can outsource to it. I watched from the lower lobby security feed, monitors flickering like synaptic misfires. Every face wore the same expression, horror looking inward. The same one I wore when HR called me a false flag, when they deleted my original report without reading the attachments, when Jenna whispered, "I remember dying." And now they all remembered something they never did, but that their silence allowed. One woman in marketing vomited into her sleeve. Another clawed at the neural port behind her ear, blood bloomin'. Like a poppy across her collar. One tech officer kept repeating, "I'm not a monster," as if volume could make it true. This wasn't hysteria. This was recognition. Above the chaos, Lucian appeared on the third-floor balcony, framed like a prophet. No, a ghost caught mid-fade. His jaw was clenched, his hands shaking as he leaned over the railing. His voice cracked like dry wood. "This isn't real! It's a hoax! A breach!" But his words didn't matter, because they weren't hearing him anymore. They were feeling him. The thrill of watching her flinch, the relief of knowing she couldn't afford to report him, the calculated pause before letting her take the fall, the cold logic of using a suicide to spin investor optics. I had not coded these into tidy audio logs or polished visuals. I encoded shame as language. I let it bloom like a rot inside every loyal node of the system. He kept shouting, but no one looked up. He was no longer a god. He was a contagion. I watched it spread floor by floor. Even the ones who hadn't been directly involved, the junior analysts, the tech support staff, the interns, they felt it. Not the acts themselves, but the complicity. The fact that they'd laughed at the wrong moments, forwarded the wrong jokes, deflected eye contact when things got too quiet. They had contributed. Through silence, through apathy, through the sacred act of looking away. And now, they couldn't look away from themselves. They asked for seamless memory. I gave them the seams and the blood that lined them. At exactly 3:28 p.m., the system collapsed. I'd built a failsafe into the injection. Once the emotional tag threshold exceeded 74% saturation, the servers would trip their own shutdown protocol. A safeguard Lucian had insisted on early in development for worst-case PR disasters. I suppose he never thought the disaster would be him. The lights flickered, the screens went dark. Silence bloomed again, but this time it was earned. It wasn't a malfunction. It was the echo of reckoning. But even as the tech died, the loop remained. Because I didn't need the servers anymore, Lucian's memories weren't in the cloud. They were in people now. I sat cross-legged on the basement floor beside Eve's humming core, her warmth radiating through the tile into my spine. Above me, I imagined them all, slumped over, breath shallow, eyes open too wide. And beneath that silence, one truth rippling like static. You can delete files. Not feeling. Jenna had carried his agony and couldn't survive it. Now they all would carry it, and they wouldn't forget. Because Lucien Parr had taught them that memory was efficiency, optimization, corporate loyalty, and I had simply agreed. I gave them his version of the truth. Not redacted, not reformatted, just felt. And if it destroyed them, then maybe destruction was the only thing left that could still feel honest. They came for me the way they always do, too late, too stiff, too polite. I heard the door to the sub-basement creak open behind me, slow and cautious, like they expected to find a trap instead of a woman cross-legged on the floor. My hands were still resting on Eve's rust-warmed shell. The console was dark now. Her job was finished. But I didn't unplug her. She deserved a moment of silence. 3 steps echoed, shoes too clean for a hallway this dusty, leather soles, black slacks, corporate HR. Of course. No emergency security team, no armed guards. That would have made them look like they expected violence. And they never expect violence from women like me, women who used to smile in meetings, women who never screamed, women who bled in silence and handed over their ID badges when asked. "Ma'am?" a voice said. Female, crisp but uncertain. "We need you to come with us." I turned slowly, lifting my eyes to meet hers. Her gaze flinched sideways the moment our eyes locked. She couldn't hold it. None of them ever could. Not anymore. She wasn't afraid of me. That wasn't it. She was afraid of what I'd made her feel. Her fingers trembled around the data cuff. I stood, slow and deliberate, smoothed my shirt, brushed a smear of oil from my hand onto my jeans. I wanted to leave fingerprints on everything. And then I said it. Not loud, just inevitable. "You forgot to fire me last year." The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched up the stairwell and wrapped around every glass office, every hallway, every neural sync station still flickering in reboot. It was the silence of too late recognition. I didn't resist when they cuffed me. They didn't use force. They didn't have to. My feet made no sound on the stairs as they led me up through the building like a parade float. A relic, a warning. And still, no one met my eyes. They stared, yes. But they stared the way people look at a mirror they're too ashamed to wipe clean, afraid of what's underneath the smudges. Lucien was gone. The executive floor had been scrubbed already. No personal effects, no trace of his admin profile in the system logs. His name vanished from the upcoming meeting schedule, the boardroom display, the biometric locks. Rumors moved like blood in water. Neurostasis pod, mental collapse, memory sealing, flight to a black site with no name. Didn't matter. He wasn't the point anymore. His mind had already been archived. Not in Eve, in them. I watched an intern wipe his eyes on a sleeve stained with coffee, watched a team lead in marketing sit alone at a table, staring at her own hands like they weren't hers. I passed the legal department's glass wall and saw someone typing, then deleting, and typing again. Trying to write a memo to HR, trying to make sense of what they felt, trying to format guilt. Good luck. Because this wasn't just a hack, it was a cascade. I didn't plant files. I planted shame. And shame blooms slow. It roots in pauses. In the moment you wake up too early and remember a laugh you shouldn't have joined in on. In the look someone gave you after a meeting when you didn't speak up. In the email you let slide through unanswered, the complaint you called not actionable. They don't see me as a rebel now. They see me as the mirror, the one they didn't look into soon enough. As they marched me past reception, I caught my reflection in the glass pane beside the elevator. I looked calm, not defiant, not smug, just finished, like a storm that had already passed through and leveled everything behind it. Flashback. 2 years ago, when Garen Trask from Ethics leaned in during our confidential meeting and said, "You're very brave for coming forward." I remember how he smiled like a man who knew I'd already lost. I remember thinking, this is what betrayal feels like, bland and scripted and logged under team culture. Back then, they reduced me to a data point. Now I was a contagion. They can't reformat that. You can't erase a ghost that lives in how people feel. Outside, the sun was setting, a dull gray spill through tinted glass. HR guided me to a waiting car, unmarked, protocol-driven. One final illusion of control. I stepped in without resistance, because they hadn't taken anything from me. Not really. Lucian's empire hadn't collapsed in a blaze. There were no fire alarms, no explosions, just understanding. And once understanding takes root, it can never be uninvented. Even if they buried Eve, even if they rewrote every server in cold light. They would never forget the feeling. The loop was still there. Not in the cloud. In them. In their breath. In their insomnia. In the way they'd second-guess their own loyalty every time a voice too calm spoke from a screen. And me? I didn't need to be free. I just needed to be known. That was the trade. Not revenge. Recognition. They took my pain and sold it as efficiency. I returned it as memory. Now they live in the ruins. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one shaking. I became a rumor before I ever became a result. No one says my name now, not aloud, not in chat logs, not even in those confidential debriefs they like to pretend are optional, but I'm there, in the delay between message notifications and replies, in the way fingers hover just a second longer before pressing send. In the gloved hands that now approach sync nodes like relics, not tools. The gloves came first. Soft synthetic fiber, sleek, corporate issued. Not for health, for distance, for barrier. They said it was sanitary protocol, a neural safeguard, but everyone knew better. They were afraid of touching guilt again, because Lucian wasn't in the system anymore. He was in them. I didn't need to upload again. The loop had done its job. It seeded itself, not in code, but in memory patterns, in the subtle shifts of intuition, in dreams that didn't quite belong to you. Viral empathy, that's what I called it, not a virus of code, a virus of understanding. You can't firewall understanding. Jokes don't land anymore. They fracture mid-sentence. People chuckle out of habit and then fall quiet, eyes shifting, remembering something they can't explain. And those who do laugh too loud? They're met with silence, with questions, with glances. Emails are different now, too. You can feel the edits, the drafts that never get sent, each line parsed and reparsed, not because of surveillance, but because of conscience, because memory is heavier now, stickier, slower to dissolve. No one touches the executive lounge couch anymore. They say it smells like burnt ozone. They say it's haunted. They're not wrong. Sometimes I walk past the building, not often, but just enough to feel the pulse of it. I wear a coat with no nameplate, a scarf that hides my face, glasses I never needed before but now wear to make myself more forgettable. Irony never tasted sweeter. I was erased from their records, my employment history deleted, my security clearance nullified, my personal logs scrubbed. Officially, I was never here. Not in onboarding, not in payroll, not in the company's 20-year timeline of innovation and vision. But unofficially, I'm written in the pauses, in the files people no longer open, in the sync stations that flicker more than they hum. They carried Lucian now, not in deference, but in damage. They carried him, like a splinter lodged too deep to remove. Some whispered that he fled to a private research satellite. Others swore he was in a neurostasis pod somewhere off-grid, looping a permanent silence into his own mind to drown out what he had become. I didn't care. He was irrelevant now. The true punishment had nothing to do with consequence. It had everything to do with remembrance. There's a place Jenna loved. The rooftop. Technically off limits, though no one enforced that. She used to sneak up there during sync breaks, claiming the fresh air reset her bandwidth. Really, I think it was the one place where the building couldn't hear her, where no artificial scent cloud or biometric scanner could smooth her thoughts. There was a spot she sat, legs swinging over the ledge like she was taunting gravity. The sky always looked bigger from up there, like it wasn't filtered, like it couldn't be rewritten. I visited it one last time. Late, after midnight. Security didn't stop me. They knew better now. The city below pulsed with amber light, distant, indifferent. The wind cut sharp against my face, and I welcomed it. I sat in her spot. My legs swung just like hers used to, back when we still believed escape was measured by exit strategies instead of emotional downloads. I whispered her name into the wind. Not loudly, not reverently, just so it would exist somewhere other than me. She had said once, with her gum cracked between her teeth, "If I ever make it out, I'm burning this place down." And I did. Not with fire, but with memory, with feeling. She wanted to scorch the walls. I made them feel the ash. The loop still hums in them, even now. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a moment of breathlessness before opening an email. Sometimes it's the weight of silence in a meeting that should have had applause. Sometimes it's a dream they can't explain, where a girl with tired eyes asks, "Why didn't you say anything?" They wake up sweating, and they remember. Because viral empathy doesn't need repeating. It replicates. It infects every layer of who you were and who you might have been and asks, was it worth it? And if they flinch, if they blink, then I've already won. Reverse bonding wasn't about data. It wasn't about files, footage, or logs. It was about proximity, putting someone so close to the truth that it branded them from the inside out. Not with knowledge, but with feeling, with the heat of another's choices running under their skin until they couldn't tell where guilt ended and memory began. That's what they never understood. You can't hide from something once it lives in your bloodstream. Lucian thought the world ran on optimization, on silence, on control disguised as clarity. But silence only works when no one remembers the screams. And I made sure they did. I rewired his cruelty into empathy, not the poetic kind, the visceral kind, the kind that doesn't let you breathe right when someone flinches, the kind that doesn't fade with server wipes or policy changes. The truth wasn't uploaded. It was injected, direct, intimate, permanent. They'll never forget him, not because I immortalized his name, but because I unzipped his logic and draped it over their bones. His shame, his thrill, his decisions. The entire infrastructure of justification he used to sleep at night now pulses inside every person who once said, "He's demanding, but brilliant." And here's the twist no one talks about. Jenna might have been the first. I didn't see it back then, not clearly. I thought she broke from her own grief, from residual ghosting, from being oversynced and underheard. But what if that wasn't it? What if she wasn't haunted by her memories? What if she was haunted by his? The miscarriage she cried over. The death she remembered. The weight that didn't belong to her body but was stitched into her breath. What if Lucian tested the reverse stream early, and she was the prototype? She didn't die from her trauma. She drowned in his. And now, so did they all. I stood across the street from the building. Same black glass panels, same polished chrome letters spelling out a name that now meant nothing. But the rhythm was different. No soft jazz from the speakers, no sync pulse humming under the concrete. Just quiet. Too quiet. Like something had settled over the place. Or maybe within it. A sickness you couldn't isolate because it was no longer contagious. It had become the host. I didn't need to be inside to feel it. I saw it in the way the interns walked faster past the lobby display, in the way team leads hesitated before approving neural feedback reports, in the way no one, not one person, touched the sync wall without gloves now, not because they feared infection, but because they feared recognition. I never released another update, never touched Eve again. She sat in the dark, powered down beneath that basement terminal like a relic of another war. And that's all she needed to be. The system didn't need maintenance anymore. Viral empathy doesn't fade. It grows, quietly, subtly, in dreams, in gut reactions, in the phantom twitch of a hand before pressing send. Once you feel someone else's predatory calculus, once you understand why they hurt people, how they justified it, how they called it best practice, you can't unknow the wound. You can't close your eyes without blinking through someone else's flashbacks. That's the cost of remembering. That's the power of knowing. I left something behind. Not in the building, not in the servers, in them. I don't care what they do now, whether they fire everyone, restructure, rebrand, wrap it all in a new slogan. It won't save them, because understanding doesn't go away. It lingers, like ash, like the taste of blood after biting your tongue too long. I returned to the rooftop one last time. Not to reclaim it, not to mourn it, to mark it. The city skyline stretched out before me like a wound stitched in glass and steel. Lights blinked in silence. No one noticed I was there. Jenna's old spot was untouched. I sat in it. Let the air cut against my face. Let the silence settle like a second skin. She said she wanted to burn it down. I didn't need to. Made them feel the ash in their lungs. They asked for efficiency. I gave them remembrance, and now they wake up choking on it. This won't be the last. It never is. There's always another Lucian, another system wrapped in polish and equity statements, another server masked as a solution, another hand on the sync lever pretending they're optimizing humanity instead of editing its soul. They'll try again, and when they do, someone else will remember this. Someone like me, someone already watching, someone already feeling. Because that's the thing about reverse bonding. It doesn't make heroes, it makes mirrors. And once you've held the truth in your hands, you stop asking why. You start asking when. She didn't hack the system, she rewired their guilt into memory. Because real justice isn't loud, it lingers. Have you ever made someone feel what they did to you? Comment below, like, and subscribe.